August 1944, France. Inside German High Command, panic was beginning to show. Maps were spread across tables, lines constantly redrawn, arrows advancing faster than anyone had expected. General George S. Patton's Third Army was not advancing in the traditional sense. It was tearing across the French countryside with a speed that made orderly defense almost impossible. Towns were falling day after day. Entire German units were being encircled before they even realized they were in danger. Defensive positions carefully planned on paper were collapsing in hours. Patton's momentum threatened more than a local defeat. It threatened to unravel the entire German defensive system in the West. Conventional responses had failed. Infantry couldn't slow him. Makeshift defenses collapsed under pressure. Time, Germany's most precious resource, was running out. So the Germans reached for their last card. They deployed the Tigers, not a handful, not as a symbolic show of force, but 72 Tiger tanks, nearly a full battalion of Germany's most feared heavy armor, were rushed directly into Patton's path. These were not ordinary tanks. Each Tiger was a steel giant, 56 tons of armor, frontal plates so thick that most Allied anti-tank weapons simply bounced off. And mounted at the heart of this monster was the weapon that terrified Allied crews above all others, the 88mm gun, capable of destroying any Allied tank at distances where return fire was useless. On paper, the decision made sense. A single Tiger could knock out multiple American Shermans before being damaged. 72 of them, properly positioned, should have stopped Patton cold. At the very least, they should have slowed his advance long enough for Germany to rebuild a defensive line. But what followed became a brutal lesson in modern warfare. By the time the fighting ended, fewer than 10 Tigers remained operational. The rest were destroyed, abandoned due to mechanical failure, captured by American forces, or blown up by their own crews to avoid capture. And Patton? His advance never even paused. No hesitation, no operational slowdown, no moment for the Germans to recover. This is not just a story about tanks. It is a story about how speed, coordination, and tactical thinking can destroy even the most powerful technology. It is the story of how Germany's most feared weapon was shattered in the fields of France, and how the myth of the invincible Tiger died not in a glorious duel, but under relentless pressure. To understand why the Germans believed the Tiger could stop Patton, you first have to understand just how frightening the Panzer VI Tiger really was. To Allied tank crews in 1944, the Tiger wasn't just another enemy vehicle, it was a nightmare made of steel. The Tiger weighed 56 tons, dwarfing the American M4 Sherman in both size and presence. Its frontal armor was so thick that most Allied anti-tank guns simply could not penetrate it head-on. Shells would strike, spark, and ricochet away, leaving the Tiger untouched. But armor alone wasn't what made the Tiger legendary. The true source of fear was its gun. The 88mm cannon, originally designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, had become one of the deadliest tank guns of the war. A Tiger could destroy an Allied tank at ranges where the Allied tank couldn't even hope to fight back. Often, Sherman crews never saw the Tiger that killed them. The first warning was the explosion. Allied soldiers quickly learned a brutal rule of thumb. One Tiger could hold up an entire armored column. American Shermans, the backbone of Patton's army, were faster, easier to maintain, and far more numerous. But in a straight fight, they were outmatched. To destroy a single Tiger, it often took 4 or 5 Shermans working together. And even then, the Tiger would usually destroy 3 or 4 Shermans before going down. The math was merciless. German propaganda seized on this reputation. Tigers were portrayed as unstoppable. Allied troops spread stories of entire units halted by a single Tiger tank. Fear magnified reality, and reality was already terrifying enough. In direct, head-on engagements, Tigers usually won. And yet, this reputation hid a critical truth. For all their power, Tigers were not flexible weapons. They were designed for a very specific kind of war. And outside of that narrow role, their weaknesses began to surface. The first weakness was speed. On roads, a Tiger might reach around 25 miles per hour under ideal conditions. Off-road in the mud, hedgerows, and broken terrain of France, it was far slower. It could not chase a retreating enemy. It could not rapidly redeploy to meet unexpected threats. The second weakness was mechanical reliability. The Tiger was an engineering marvel and a maintenance nightmare. Its transmission and engine were complex and fragile. Breakdowns were common, especially during long movements. For every Tiger destroyed in combat, another was often abandoned simply because it had broken down. The third weakness was fuel consumption. A Tiger consumed fuel at an alarming rate, less than 1 mile per gallon, and by 1944, Germany was desperately short of fuel. Some Tigers ran out of gas before they ever reached the battlefield. Others were immobilized during combat because resupply convoys never arrived. And then there was the most important limitation of all. The Tiger was a defensive weapon. It performed best when positioned hull down behind terrain, firing at long range, covering open ground. In those conditions, its strengths were overwhelming. But when forced to maneuver, to attack, or to react to fast-moving situations, its size, weight, and mechanical fragility became deadly liabilities. Patton understood this better than most Allied commanders. The Germans knew these weaknesses too. But by August 1944, they were out of options. Patton's Third Army was moving too fast for carefully prepared defenses. The Germans needed something, anything, that could stop American armor long enough to regain control of the front. So they committed what they believed was their ultimate solution: 72 Tigers. It should have worked. It should have at least slowed Patton down. What happened instead proved that fearsome weapons mean nothing if they are forced to fight the wrong kind of war. By August 1944, German commanders were no longer making ideal decisions. They were making urgent ones. Patton's Third Army was advancing at a pace that broke every assumption German planners relied on. Traditional defenses, layered infantry positions, anti-tank guns, planned counterattacks, required time to prepare and coordination to execute. Patton gave them neither. Every delay meant another town lost. Every pause meant another gap torn open in the front. German commanders needed something that could impose order on chaos. Something powerful enough to halt American armor immediately without waiting for perfect conditions. That something was the Tiger. German doctrine had always emphasized careful use of heavy armor. Tigers were meant to be deployed deliberately, anchoring defensive lines, covering retreats, counterattacking at decisive moments. They were not meant to be rushed forward to plug gaps in a collapsing front. But doctrine collapses under desperation. High command believed that if anything could shock Patton's advance into slowing down, it would be Tigers. Not because Tigers were flawless, but because nothing else remained that could confront American armor head-on. So they committed nearly an entire battalion, 72 Tigers, concentrated and sent directly into Patton's projected line of advance. In theory, the plan was sound. German intelligence identified likely American routes of movement. Tigers were positioned in defensive locations, hull down behind terrain, covering open ground where American tanks would be forced to advance. Long-range fields of fire were selected carefully. This was textbook use of heavy armor. American tanks would advance, Tigers would engage from distance, Shermans would burn, the advance would stall, time would be bought. That was the expectation, but the plan assumed one critical thing: that Patton would fight the battle the Germans wanted. He didn't. While other Allied commanders slowed down when Tigers were reported, Patton reacted differently. He didn't see Tigers as an obstacle to be avoided. He saw them as a problem to be overwhelmed. Patton had spent years studying German armored doctrine. He understood exactly how Tigers were supposed to be used, and more importantly, where they struggled. He knew they relied on long-range engagements, stable defensive positions, and predictable enemy behavior. So he made sure none of those conditions existed. Rather than massing his forces for a single breakthrough, Patton reorganized his advance into multiple fast-moving columns, each taking different routes, constantly shifting direction. Reconnaissance units were pushed far ahead, tasked not with fighting Tigers, but with finding them. When Tigers were spotted, Patton did not halt the advance to plan a careful assault. He escalated. Artillery was called in, not to destroy Tigers outright, but to suppress them. Heavy shelling forced Tiger crews to button up, closing hatches and losing visibility. Smoke obscured sightlines, negating the Tigers' long-range advantage. While the Tigers were suppressed, tank destroyers moved. Unlike Sherman's, American tank destroyers were faster and mounted guns specifically designed to kill German armor. They were not meant to trade shots head-on. Their job was to maneuver, to flank, to ambush, to strike side armor where even a Tiger was vulnerable. And above all of it came air power. Patton had arranged for continuous close air support. Fighter bombers were on call specifically for anti-tank missions. They couldn't always destroy Tigers directly, but they didn't need to. Rockets and bombs damaged tracks, disrupted formations, and forced crews to abandon positions. The Tigers were no longer fighting one enemy. They were fighting everything at once. This was the moment when German confidence began to crack. The Tigers were positioned for a deliberate defensive battle, but Patton refused to give them one. He didn't stop to fight. He didn't slow down to reorganize. He kept moving. And in doing so, he turned the Tigers' greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. The exact location matters less than what unfolded. Late August 1944, German intelligence had correctly identified where Patton's forces were likely to advance. Tigers were positioned exactly as doctrine demanded, hull down behind terrain, guns covering open ground, waiting for American armor to expose itself. On paper, it was perfect. American tanks would have to cross open fields. Tigers would engage from long range. The advance would be halted by firepower alone. That battle never happened. Patton's reconnaissance units reached the area first. Instead of blundering into the kill zone, they spotted the Tigers before the main force arrived. Within hours, Patton changed the shape of the battle. He didn't pull back. He didn't mass his tanks for a frontal assault. He split his forces. Multiple American columns moved along different routes, constantly shifting direction. The Tigers were no longer guarding a single axis of advance. They were reacting to movement everywhere. When contact was made, American tanks did not stop to duel. They called in artillery. Shells slammed into Tiger positions, not to punch through armor, but to suppress. Explosions forced crews to close hatches. Dust, smoke, and shock waves stripped away the Tigers' greatest advantage: visibility and range. While the Tigers were pinned, American tank destroyers maneuvered. They moved fast, cutting across terrain, searching for angles. They weren't trying to win a heroic fight. They were hunting for side shots, where Tiger armor was thinner, where a single hit could ignite ammunition or disable the engine. Then came the aircraft. P-47 Thunderbolts roared overhead, rockets and bombs slamming into Tiger positions. Direct kills were rare, but damage didn't need to be catastrophic. A destroyed track immobilized a Tiger. A damaged engine forced abandonment, and the psychological effect was devastating. Tiger crews found themselves under attack from every direction at once. Artillery from one side, tank destroyers maneuvering on the flanks, aircraft screaming down from above. And through it all, American Shermans kept advancing. They didn't stop to finish the Tigers. They pushed past them, toward objectives beyond the Tiger positions. This was exactly what Tigers were never designed to handle. The first Tigers fell not in dramatic duels, but to mundane failures. One Tiger threw a track while trying to reposition under artillery fire. Immobilized, its crew abandoned it before American forces even reached the area. Another Tiger ran out of fuel. The supply convoy never arrived, destroyed miles back by American fighter bombers. The crew attempted to tow it with another Tiger. Both broke down. Both were abandoned. 3 Tigers were destroyed by tank destroyers that had flanked their position while the Tigers were engaging Shermans to the front. Side armor was penetrated. Ammunition detonated. Catastrophic kills. 2 more Tigers were struck by P-47 rockets. One lost a track and was abandoned. Another took a hit to the engine deck, starting a fire that forced the crew to bail out. And all of this happened in less than 6 hours. German commanders had expected the Tigers to hold for days. They lasted hours. By nightfall on the first day, over 20 Tigers were destroyed or abandoned. The survivors were shaken. Crews who had entered battle expecting dominance now felt hunted. They had been prepared to fight tanks. They had not been prepared to fight everything at once. If the first day shattered German confidence, the second day destroyed any remaining hope. During the night, Patton's forces did what they always did best. They learned and adapted faster than the enemy. Reconnaissance reports were analyzed, Tiger positions were mapped, and artillery targets were assigned before dawn. The Germans, meanwhile, were already behind. Tiger crews had spent the night repairing damage, towing disabled vehicles, and trying to reposition under constant pressure. Maintenance units were overwhelmed. Fuel was scarce. Ammunition resupply was irregular. Crews were exhausted, shaken by the realization that they were no longer the hunters. At first light, American artillery opened up. Shells bracketed known Tiger positions before the tanks even began to move. German crews were forced to button up immediately when you saw losing situational awareness the moment the day began. Tank destroyers had moved during the night. They now waited in ambush positions, covering likely movement routes. When Tigers attempted to reposition, slowly, cautiously, they were already being watched. More Tigers broke down. The constant movement, the stress of rapid redeployment, and the lack of proper maintenance facilities took their toll. Transmissions failed, engines overheated, tracks snapped. Tanks that could have dominated from prepared positions became immobile liabilities simply because they were forced to move too often. When Tigers did engage, the pattern repeated itself. Artillery suppressed, tank destroyers flanked, aircraft attacked from above. American forces never gave the Tigers time to stabilize, coordinate, or fight on favorable terms. German commanders began sending increasingly desperate messages, requests for infantry support, air cover, better coordination with artillery. Many of those requests arrived too late. Others went unanswered. Patton's advance had disrupted German command and control so thoroughly that units were fighting isolated battles, unaware of what was happening just a few miles away. By the end of the second day, the reality was impossible to ignore. The Tiger deployment had failed. Not because Tigers were bad tanks, they weren't, but because the tempo of Patton's operations had turned their strengths into weaknesses. Heavy armor designed for deliberate defense was being forced into a running fight it could not sustain. German commanders faced a terrible choice: stay and lose the remaining Tigers piecemeal, or withdraw and risk destruction during retreat. They chose to withdraw. Withdrawal should have offered the Tigers a chance to survive. Instead, it became their final test, and their final failure. By the third day, German commanders ordered the remaining Tigers to pull back beyond Patton's immediate area of operations. On paper, retreat seemed safer than standing and being destroyed in place. In reality, retreat exposed every weakness the Tiger possessed. The Tigers were slow. American forces were not. As Tiger units began moving rearward, Patton's tank destroyers and armored elements pressed forward relentlessly. Retreating Tigers were engaged from behind and from the flanks, exactly where their armor was thinnest. Fuel shortages worsened. Supply lines had been shattered by air attacks and rapid American advances. Some Tigers ran out of fuel mid-retreat. Immobilized and unable to tow one another, crews were forced to destroy their own vehicles to prevent capture. Mechanical failures multiplied. The stress of combat and constant movement pushed already fragile systems past their limits. Transmissions failed, engines seized, tracks broke under the weight of damaged suspension systems. Disabled Tigers littered the retreat routes, silent monuments to engineering overstretched beyond its purpose. And Patton never let up. American artillery hammered withdrawal routes, turning roads into kill zones. Fighter bombers strafed German columns, forcing dispersal and slowing movement even further. Tank destroyers harassed flanks, preventing German units from forming effective rearguards. This was Patton's philosophy in action: never let the enemy recover, never give them time to regroup, make retreat as costly as defense. One captured German officer later summarized the experience with brutal clarity. "We expected a battle. What we got was a pursuit. Your forces never stopped long enough for us to establish a defensive position." That was the heart of Patton's method. He understood that Tigers were most dangerous when static, prepared, and supported. So he ensured they were never static, never prepared, and never supported long enough to matter. By the time the surviving Tigers managed to withdraw beyond Patton's reach, The damage was catastrophic. Of the 72 Tigers committed to stop Patton's advance, fewer than 10 remained operational. The rest were destroyed in combat, abandoned due to mechanical failure, captured by American forces, or blown up by their own crews. The road ahead lay wide open. The weapon meant to stop Patton had failed completely. What happened to the Tiger Battalion was not a fluke. It was not bad luck, and it was not the result of incompetence by German crews. The Tigers failed because war is not decided by specifications. On paper, the Tiger was superior to the Sherman in almost every technical category: armor thickness, firepower, range, survivability in a direct fight. In a controlled, static engagement, the Tiger was devastating. But war is not a technical competition. It is a contest of systems, tempo, and decision-making under pressure. The first lesson was simple and brutal. Tactics beat technology. One Tiger was better than one Sherman, but one Tiger could not handle artillery, aircraft, tank destroyers, and maneuvering armor all at once. Patton's forces did not try to outgun the Tiger. They overwhelmed it with coordination. Each American system covered the weaknesses of the others. Where tanks struggled, artillery suppressed. Where armor stalled, air power disrupted. Where the Tiger turned to face one threat, another appeared from a different direction. The second lesson was about speed and tempo. Tigers could destroy more American tanks per engagement, but Patton rarely allowed prolonged engagements. His forces engaged, disengaged, and moved faster than the Tigers could react. Heavy armor requires time. Time to reposition, time to resupply, time to prepare firing positions. Patton denied the Germans all three. The third lesson was logistical and devastating. Tigers required enormous amounts of fuel, ammunition, and maintenance. Patton's rapid advance shattered German supply lines so thoroughly that many Tigers became useless without ever being destroyed. A tank that cannot move, cannot fire, or cannot be repaired is already defeated. And then there was the psychological factor. Tiger crews entered the battle expecting dominance. For years, Tigers had been symbols of superiority. But when those crews found themselves suppressed, flanked, attacked from above, and forced to abandon their vehicles, confidence collapsed. Morale is not abstract. It directly affects performance. The deeper problem was doctrinal. Germany had designed the Tiger for defensive warfare, holding ground, anchoring retreats, counterattacking methodical advances. The Tigers were used exactly as they were designed to be used, but Patton refused to fight the battle the Tigers were built for. He fought a war of movement. By the time Tigers were positioned to defend, American forces were already bypassing them, flanking them, or calling in airstrikes. The battle the Germans wanted simply never materialized. This is why George S. Patton succeeded where other Allied commanders struggled against Tigers. Others slowed down. Others fought cautiously. Others accepted the Tiger's terms. Patton didn't. He changed the nature of the fight. The destruction of the Tiger Battalion had consequences far beyond the battlefield where it occurred. For German High Command, the failure was a shock. They had committed their best armored weapon to stop Patton, and it had failed completely. This shattered any remaining belief that so-called wonder weapons could compensate for Allied advantages in coordination, logistics, and tempo. From that point forward, German commanders understood a harsh truth. Superior equipment meant nothing if it could not be brought to bear on the battlefield in the right way, at the right time. Whenever German intelligence identified Patton's forces operating in a sector, expectations changed. Defensive positions alone were no longer trusted. Heavy armor was no longer seen as a guarantee of control. If Patton was coming, commanders knew they either needed overwhelming force or they needed to withdraw before contact was made. For American forces, the battle delivered something just as important: confidence. Sherman crews had feared Tigers for good reason, but now they had proof. Not that Tigers were easy to destroy, but that they could be defeated consistently if the right tactics were used. Crews learned that survival did not depend on having a better tank, but on fighting as part of a coordinated system. Captured German tank crews told a remarkably similar story during interrogations. They did not say they had been beaten by better tanks. They said they had been beaten by better coordination. One German commander summarized it bluntly. "We never fought the same enemy twice. First artillery, then aircraft, then tank destroyers, then infantry. By the time we adjusted to one threat, two more appeared." That was the essence of the doctrine that destroyed the Tigers. Everything at once, all the time, no pause. The strategic implications were clear. Germany's most feared armored weapon had not been neutralized by superior technology, but by a commander who refused to fight the battle it was designed for. The Tiger had been built to dominate static defenses in deliberate engagements. Instead, it was dragged into a war of motion it could not survive. 72 Tigers were rushed forward to stop Patton's advance. Fewer than 10 survived. This was not luck. It was not a miracle. It was the result of speed, pressure, coordination, and a refusal to slow down. The Tigers failed not because they were bad tanks. They were excellent tanks. They failed because their enemy would not let them fight on their terms. And that lesson remains timeless. When facing a superior weapon, don't challenge it where it is strongest. Change the nature of the fight, exploit its limitations, and never give it time to recover. The Germans sent their best weapons to stop Patton. What they discovered was that even the most powerful machines in the world are useless if the enemy never gives them the chance to be used properly. The road ahead lay open, and Patton never looked back. 72 Tigers were sent to stop one man's advance. They were not defeated by a miracle. They were not defeated by inferior crews, and they were not defeated because they were poorly designed. They were defeated because the battle they were built for never happened. The Tiger was meant to dominate static warfare, to sit in prepared positions, to command open ground, to force enemies into predictable, methodical fights. Against that kind of enemy, it was terrifying. But Patton refused predictability. He refused pauses. He refused set-piece battles. He refused to slow down. Instead, he forced the Tigers into constant motion, constant reaction, constant stress. He denied them fuel, denied them maintenance, denied them time. He surrounded them with artillery, harassed them with aircraft, flanked them with tank destroyers, and pushed past them with relentless momentum. The Tigers were never allowed to settle, never allowed to control the battlefield, never allowed to fight as they were designed to fight, and so, one by one, they failed. Some burned, some broke down. Some were abandoned in fields and on roadsides, destroyed by their own crews. By the time the survivors withdrew, the myth was already dead. Not the myth that Tigers were powerful, but the myth that power alone could decide a war. What happened in France in August 1944 revealed a truth that still applies today. Superior technology does not win wars. Superior thinking does. Speed beats armor. Coordination beats firepower. Pressure beats preparation. The Germans sent their best weapon to stop Patton. What they learned is that the best weapon in the world means nothing if your enemy refuses to let you use it. The road ahead lay wide open, and Patton's army kept moving, leaving burned-out wrecks behind them as silent proof that steel is only as strong as the doctrine that guides it.